I watched Trump's press conference on DC today, so you don't have to, and here's my overview, and whether or not I have to rush, I'm going to fit this all in one 10-minute video. First off, I'm not going to give you the craziest thing because there was no craziest thing. The entire thing was absolutely insane. It ran for about an hour and 15 minutes, and he somehow mentioned Biden 13 times in an hour and 15 minutes. So he starts off just by telling you what happened. The DC police are now under federal control, and he will be deploying the DC National Guard to our capital for the beautification of Washington, DC. If you're wondering why, he says that the DC murder rate is worse than the worst places in the world. His words. He also says that carjackings have doubled and the murders have reached the highest rate since probably ever. His words. If you're new here, all of these are his words. He says that the city was taken over by violent gangs, bloodthirsty criminals, roving mobs of wild youth, and drugged out maniacs and homeless people. He says he's going to fix it just like he fixed the southern border, where he says that for 3 months in a row, 0 people have crossed illegally, which is a statistical impossibility, but he says that that number is determined by very liberal people, so we have to believe it. So now he trusts liberals. He says the murder rate in DC is 41 per every 100,000 people. It's actually 25.74. A simple Google search will show you that. He says this federalization of the police force is going to happen in other bad cities, as he calls them, like Chicago, LA, New York, Baltimore, and Oakland. And he says that people don't even mention the last two anymore because they're so far gone. Baltimore and Oakland never even mentioned anymore because they're so far gone. He talks about Big Balls getting beat up in the street, and this is how much of a beta he and Big Balls are. He says that Big Balls couldn't believe he was alive and thought he was dead because he had a broken nose. He says DC has now become a situation of complete and total lawlessness, and that he's going to get rid of the, quote, slums, as he calls it. He has a new catchphrase, "You spit, we hit," because he was saying that police were being spat at and there was nothing they can do about it. But now he's saying that police can do something about it, and what they can do is whatever they want to do, exactly verbatim, whatever they want to do. He says the failings of DC are due to the radical left leadership and that they're weak on crime, but even they don't understand why they're weak on crime, and that we have to end cash bail in this country. And then he again says transgender for everyone and clarifies that by saying everyone is transgender, whatever that means. He at one point says that he thought that there were 30 police officers in all of DC, and then he found out that it was 3,500, and he was amazed, and he thought that was too many because that's basically an army. He says we're going to fill the streets with DEA, FBI, and ATF, and he says that other countries don't have all these other types of special police, but what they have is tough police, and they always get the job done. He's talking about dictatorships, by the way. He says he's declaring a public safety emergency, and then says that he's embarrassed by DC because people like Putin can see what's going on in DC, and then he's going to be going to Russia, even though he's going to Alaska, and he later will allude to that, but then he will later also say that he's going to Russia. But Putin sees that DC is a mess, and he's embarrassed because he has to meet with Putin. You might be like, who's going to be in control of the Metropolitan Police Department? Well, Pam Bondi, so no worries there, of course. He doesn't give any context on this, so I can't either, but he says that people got put in because of woke. Whatever the hell that could possibly mean. In addition to the FBI in the streets, he says that the military is going to be in the streets, but that probably won't be needed. But if it is, it's done all the time, all over the place, so it's not a big deal. He's talking about martial law. He says that martial law is done all the time, all over the place, not a big deal. Because there's no consistency within the cabinet, Drunk says that the DC National Guard has already been deployed, but there's also a bunch of other special groups that could be deployed at the president's discretion, even though the president has said that the military has been deployed and the military has not been deployed already. There's no consistency. Bondi says that crime in DC is going to end today and that we will no longer have gangs of young teenage girls beating disabled men to death. I don't know what she meant by that, but she said it. Kash Patel says that they've seized enough fentanyl, doesn't say where from or over what period of time, but to kill 115 million Americans, and then says that we have to get rid of the trafficking of children in Washington, D.C. Very interesting when he's in control of the Epstein files and won't release them. Now back to Trump, he says that he won't allow homeless people to turn our capital into a wasteland, and says that he offered before, he's talking about January 6th, says that he offered before to have 10,000 National Guard troops, even though he sat in the White House for 3 hours while they were raiding the Capitol and while they were saying, hang Mike Pence. He did nothing for 3 hours and he was the only one in control of the National Guard, but he claims that he had 10,000 available and ready to go just whenever. He brings up Jeanine Pirro and says that because she was such a great prosecutor and judge that she also then had a great career in showbiz, as he says it. And then Jeanine Pirro says that criminals, instead of going to jail, they get to do yoga and arts and crafts. Oh yeah, that's if they're under 18. And even if they've done shootings and stuff, they just get to do yoga and arts and crafts. Here's a direct quote. Democrats don't want safety. They don't know why. They just don't. I swear to God, he says this. He says that the Lincoln Memorial had Lincoln's statue torn down. He's sitting in a chair, by the way, in that statue. Had Lincoln's statue torn down, and that people had ropes around Thomas Jefferson at the Jefferson Memorial until he enacted some law from the early 1800s that he doesn't want to give an exact date on or give a name for, and then they all just left. But there were ropes around, and then he says Lincoln and Andrew Jackson. So they didn't pull Lincoln down. Now it's Jackson instead of Jefferson. He doesn't know history at all. He says everyone, and I mean everyone, agrees with what we're doing today, and then reiterates that just a year ago our country was dead, but today we're the hottest country in the world, which has been confirmed to him by everyone in the Middle East and every single leader in NATO. He claims that trillions of dollars, no joke, trillions of dollars have been brought in from tariffs. I will remind you that if that were true, that is your money, because tariffs are a tax on an imported good paid by the importer. And two, the operating budget of the United States government is approximately $5 trillion per year. He then later in the conversation says that it's hundreds of billions of dollars, also not true, also still your money, and then claims at one point that he has solved 5 separate wars, but he can't seem to figure out the 2 that he promised would be over by day 1. You know, medians like in the middle of the road? He says that he's never ever seen one that looked good ever, but in DC they're especially bad. And they're falling down just into the street all over DC. Here's a direct quote: "If the Capitol is dirty, the entire country is dirty. Do with that what you will." Maybe there's a MAGA stoner who doesn't know what they were listening to and made it this far. He wants to reclassify cannabis in DC and says that he sees some good from medical cannabis, but from recreational cannabis he sees no good whatsoever. Aside from the tax revenue, which he doesn't mention. That's just me knowing that. Because he's such a good businessman, he refuses to confirm or deny whether or not he's going to extend the tariff pause on China. Regarding Ukraine, he says he strongly disagrees with what Zelensky has done and that there's going to be swapping of land between Ukraine and Russia, whatever that means. And he says that they have lines that are very uneven and they're going to try and get territory back for the Ukraine, but a lot of that is oceanfront property. And as everyone knows, oceanfront property is the most valuable, so he doesn't know whether or not he's going to be able to get that back. He says from the standpoint of land, Russia is the largest, which is true, but feels very much like from the standpoint of water, Hurricane Helene was the wettest. So I just had to throw it in there. He says within 2 minutes of meeting with Putin, he's going to know whether or not they can make a deal with Ukraine, which sounds like the whole thing could have been a phone call and save the American taxpayers the money of flying him out to Alaska to meet with a leader who has time and time again absolutely stomped on him, including the last time they met in private and including time and time again when Trump himself says we have really great phone calls, but then hours later bombs are falling on Kiev. And then a reporter asks him, how do you know that within 2 minutes you're going to be able to do that? And he says, it's because it's what I do. Here's another quote he didn't give context for, and I can't seem to find the context for it because it doesn't make any sense. We sell fighter jets to a country and give them 20% less than what we have. End of quote. He says, quote, meeting with Putin might be bad, but it could be good. I swear to God he says this. He says he's going to put Putin and Zelensky in a room, and he might be there or he might not be there, but either way, it's going to get solved by him just putting them in a room. He starts freaking out at the end because he's like, stop asking me questions about other things. Ask me questions about DC. That's why we're here. It's not fair to all these reporters to be here because obviously the thing they want to talk about is DC. They don't want to talk about Russia. They don't want to talk about the Epstein files. So make sure you only ask me questions about DC. And then he calls in the next reporter and they start to ask a question. He's like, hold up. Is this question going to be about DC? Because if it's not, I don't want you asking it. He again, towards the end, says that he's going to Russia to meet with Putin, even though we all know that he's going to Alaska. So maybe he wants to just give Alaska back to Russia. And that's why he's saying that Alaska is where he's going and that he's also going to Russia. I honestly don't know. He's just a hot mess out here. And then he says, and I really have no idea who he's referencing. He might be referencing the American people. He might be referencing the media. He might be referencing Russians. He might be referencing Ukrainians. But he says that they have OD'd on settling Ukraine. Whatever that means, like overdose. That's what he says. And then finally, he says that had he not been involved, this would not end until the last person breathing was dead. Okay, he was the only one who can solve this. Apparently, a bunch of others have tried, and he's the only one. But if it wasn't for him, every single person in Russia and every single person in Ukraine would be dead before any of this was solved. So there you go, a complete overview of what happened, all the crazy things that were said, all the blatant lies that were said, a little bit of fact checking here and there, and I got it all done in under 9 minutes. You're welcome. To my 10%ers, thank you so much for being here. Apparently tagging CNN, MSNBC, The Daily Show, and The Colbert Report over 10,000 times did not spark enough interest for them to reach out to me. So this time I'm going to ask you to do one thing. Again, even if you've already commented, please just go in, tag Jasmine Crockett, tag AOC, and tag Bernie Sanders. Because like Bernie Sanders and AOC, I am also fighting oligarchy to the best that I can. So maybe by reaching out to them, they'll at least give me some attention, which would bring some news attention, which would allow me to get verified, which would allow you to stop receiving messages from fake accounts that are not mine that keep asking you questions about crypto or whatever it is they're doing. It's all fake. I will never message you. I promise you that. But please, if you could, and you're in the 10% who made it this far, tag AOC, tag Bernie, and tag Jasmine Crockett. Okay, these are people that I actually respect within the Democratic Party. Thanks.